Hey there. For this week's Writer's Toolbox, I'm going to give you a quick little introduction to introductions. And introductions are one of those sort of tricky things. People sometimes worry about them too soon in the process, I think, and feel like you have to get the perfect intro set up in order to make things happen. But I think instead what you should be focusing on is going back to your introduction once you've written your essay, got feedback on it, are revising, and make the introduction really fit what your essay has become, because sometimes in the process of writing it's easy to get a little bit of a stray from things, and revising your intro after the fact allows you to really focus on your audience, to tailor it to them, and to really draw the reader in and help them to make sense of your essay. Of course, you have to think about all the things you read day in and day out, and what needs to happen is something really needs to get your attention right at the beginning usually. And even for your professors on campus, we have to read your essays, of course, but to make a good impression and get people off interested and engaged in your essay from the very beginning is a great goal for you to have as far as writing your essay and submitting it to your instructor. So to get us started, let's see, I want to talk about the goals of an introduction. I think that sometimes people try to rush through the introduction too much and don't really do everything that would help them engage the reader. And the first thing that you need to do with the intro, of course, is get their attention. Like I said, even if it's your instructor for a course, you want to make them want to read the rest of your essay. That's going to influence your grade in the long term, I would argue. And so hooking them in, we call it that the hook sometimes, is an important part of your essay. And I'll talk a little bit more about the hook in just a second. The other thing that you need to do in your introduction is you frequently will need to provide background and context for your essay. How is this relevant? This sort of gets to the so what part that the they say, I say has been talking about. And I think that that's an important thing to consider. What is this being written for? Not just the context of the class, but how does it fit in maybe with things going on currently, with your own development, with the content of the class. And particularly that's the context, but if there's some background information about the subject that your reader might be unfamiliar with, it's important that you provide them the information needed to make sense of your topic. Another thing that you're doing in your intro is establishing your credibility. And that sort of comes in a number of ways. Your credibility sometimes can be who you are, your own experiences with the topic, your own ideas, things that you have connections with to the essay. But even if it's a topic that's completely unfamiliar to you, before you, of course, did your research, your credibility comes in here by your speaking knowledgeably about the subject, providing some good research in the beginning that shows that you're an expert in some sense, that you've looked into this, you've thought about it, you know something about it. And we want to, after reading the introduction, feel like you're going to have something of interest to share with us that we'll have the opportunity to learn from you. Okay, so that's an important thing as well. The final thing in your introduction is that you state your purpose. Usually this is your thesis. And it should be clear to the reader by the time they finish your introduction what this is going to be about. What are they going to learn? How are you going to influence their behavior, their thinking? Okay, what is it that you're actually going to show here? And the thing I want to comment on, I'm going to go and talk more specifically about the hook and more specifically about the thesis. But I want to mention, this doesn't have to happen in one single paragraph. There's a lot to do here. You can often have an introduction that's a couple of paragraphs long. It usually depends on the complexity of your subject and the length of your paper. And if you're just writing a 3-page paper, you might have a 1-paragraph intro. But when you get into 4, 5, 6, 7 pages, and the issue obviously is more complicated, it will take you a couple paragraphs to do that. And if you think about a lot of times when you read a book, there's an entire chapter that serves an introduction. So the introduction is something that is equivalent to the length of the final piece. And so the more in-depth your essay is, the longer the essay is, generally speaking, it's often the case that your introduction will be more than 1 paragraph long, and that's perfectly fine. So a 2 or 3 paragraph introduction in an essay that's 5 to 7 pages would not be unheard of. And if you want to do a good job in getting all 4 of these things done within your intro, you often are going to have more than a single paragraph that you'll be doing. The thesis, I'm actually going to start, well actually I'm going to go forward. I'm going to talk about the hook first. Okay, this is the first thing in your essay, and there are a lot of different ways to start an essay in order to get the reader engaged. I've taken a few that I use from another textbook that I've used in this class sometimes called The Working Writer. And in that book, Fulwiler talks about a number of different possibilities for opening an essay. I think what happens sometimes is people get into a rut, right? You always start your essay with a quote, or you always start your essay with a story or an anecdote. But it can be good, particularly in your portfolio where you're going to be sharing 2 or 3 different essays with the reader. You don't want to have the same exact way that you start each of those essays. Okay, so mixing it up can be a really good thing and sort of challenging yourself to open in a different way than you usually do. If you're the first one, open with a conflict. If your topic is controversial, okay, a conflict might be the thing to do. You can begin by sharing the conflict, the sides involved, what's going on with that, and really, provide the reader with the sense of what's behind the scenes in these 2 sides that are going on. And people like a story that has some controversy. And if it's not controversial, people still like a story, I'd have to say. Opening with a story that makes it a little bit personal, maybe something that you read about that relates to a real person, something that happened. If you think about when you go to tell your friends something, it usually always starts with a story. And the story is a way to grab people in and really get them going. You might start with a specific detail. This could be a really good example if you're doing something about a particular place, or you have a real vivid image that's related to your subject. Describing that in detail to put a picture in the reader's mind can be a really helpful thing. I'm going to start about opening at the beginning. This, of course, might be something, again, with a chronological background or a story involved, or going back to tell sort of the backstory on something that's happening. Maybe this would be a current event, and sort of going back to where it began and telling a little bit about it. Just an overview. It doesn't have to be an entirely detailed thing. I want to talk about quotations, statistics, and a question, because these can all be really good ways to start an introduction. I think, though, that a lot of times people don't choose great quotations or statistics or questions. It's just something I've been told that I should start with a quotation, and so you throw one in there, and that's supposed to do something. I'd say that if you're going to start with a quotation, it should be something that's a really powerful statement, or is going to surprise somebody by what is being said by the author or the person that you're quoting. Something that's been said in such a clear and concise and effective, impactful way that you couldn't possibly say it better yourself. And if you do use a quotation, you need to say who said it. Don't just stick it at the beginning. It's like a quote bomb there. And you need to say, said so-and-so in this context, or have the quote and say, this quote by. Okay, don't just stick it on at the beginning and then begin your own discussion. You need to comment on who said it, sort of explain how they're experts, and then connect it to the beginning of your conversation. Statistics. Usually we would use a statistic because it would surprise somebody. It doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense to give somebody a statistic that they'd probably be aware of. Okay, but you want to have a statistic that will, maybe people think, really? 9 out of 10 people do that? I can't believe it, right? So you want to draw them in and sort of shock them a little to get them going. Opening with a question is a really common way to go, but I really warn you that this question is used to make people think, okay? If you're not going to try to make people think about the answer, there's no reason to ask a question. So like if I were to start a paper and I'd say, how many people have a hard time getting up for their 8 o'clock class? Well, the answer is self-evident. Almost everyone, and maybe there's a few early risers in the group, will feel that they have a hard time getting up, at 8 o'clock for their class. And so the question has an obvious answer, and so it's not worth asking. Instead, you might as well just begin by saying, everyone has a hard time getting up for their first class of the day. Okay, so the question should make people think. You want to make sure that you are, getting a response from people. You're thinking that they're going to pause and engage in the question that you're asking. Likewise, one question that's a really good one can be good. 2 questions, you're treading a thin line. 3 questions, way too many. And this is anywhere. This isn't just the opening of your paper. This could be anywhere. Sometimes people ask too many questions. The first question asked, if I'm the reader, I might stop and think about it. And that's a good thing, right? The second question you ask, I'm going to stop really briefly, if at all. And by the third question, I'm not reading it as a question anymore. I'm starting to think, does this person have any answers? Or is it just going to be questions all the way? So it's important that you consider this in using questions. Okay, so quotation statistics questions can be good ways to engage your reader, but you need to be careful and really make sure that it has some impact rather than just playing this role that you think it should. Okay. I talked about the 2 other things about establishing credibility and providing background and context, and those are a little bit more self-evident, but I'd be happy to talk to you about those if you have some more questions. The other thing is the thesis. Okay, and I want to talk about what a thesis is because I think that a lot of times people get a little bit confused on this. The first thing is what a thesis is not. A thesis is not an announcement. And what I mean by this is something that says, in this essay, I will tell you, or I am going to demonstrate, or this essay will explore. You don't need to use those words. It's sort of like announcing the purpose of my paper. You don't need to announce it. Simply saying, and actually an announcement detracts from actually making a claim a lot of the time. If you say, I am going to prove that Mary is a good person, just say, Mary is a good person, right? There's no reason to announce it and, sort of make it a statement of fact, a claim, a judgment, and just put it out there. We know it's your opinion or your idea or your claim because it's your essay. And as long as you haven't attributed the idea to somebody else, who else would it belong to? And so simply stating the end desire. Vegetarianism is the most healthy option for somebody to follow on a diet. Okay, that's a thesis statement. It doesn't have to be announced. I am going to prove to you that that's an announcement. So you want to stay away from that type of thing. The other thing a thesis is not is a plan of development. And what I mean by this is we've sort of, people often come with that 5-paragraph essay mentality that they're going to write about Mary is kind, happy, and smart. Okay, and so that's what they say in their thesis. I'm going to have these 3 topics, and so I'm going to tell the person all the things I'm going to say in my essay. And that can work okay for a 5-paragraph essay when you only have 3 topics to cover and it's relatively simplistic. It might be a good plan for an essay exam response because you can state all 3 things right out there. But by the time you get to a 5 to 7 page paper, you really can't say everything in your thesis that you're going to do in your essay. So you don't need to say, vegetarianism is fantastic because A, B, C, D, E, but it can have some problems like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So in order to handle this, you should X, Y, Z. Okay, it's going to get a little cumbersome when you think about all the words you'd have to include to really tell everybody everything you're going to talk about in your essay. So simply making the end result. Okay, what is it that you are going to prove to us in this essay? Vegetarianism is the best diet for a young person to consider in the interest of their health. Okay, I'm making them up on that. You have a lot better things to say than that. But Just state the end result. And as long as the things that in your thesis or in the rest of your paper are all leading up to and supporting that and are logically organized, that's completely sufficient. The other thing that your thesis is not, or it does not do, is it does not state a fact. Meaning, vegetarianism is a diet that many people follow. That's a fact. Okay? And you don't need to state something that's a fact. Your thesis needs to, as the bullet number 4 says, it needs to state a claim or make a judgment. Okay? And that is, and then you're going to prove that in the essay. So it has to be something that, I mean, it doesn't have to be controversial, right? But if I say vegetarianism is the best option for a young person to consider when choosing a diet plan, okay, words like best, that's actually a claim, okay? I'm making a judgment about something. I'm not just saying it's an option, it's the best one. And my essay is going to then set about to prove that. Okay, so you need to make sure that your thesis does more than just state a fact. Your thesis is also often the very last sentence at the end of the introduction. Okay, there's exceptions to that. In cases where theses aren't in introductions that you use, it's a difference between using inductive or deductive reasoning. But in the majority of papers that you write at the university level, your instructor is going to expect that your thesis is the last sentence at the end of your introduction. And remember, this doesn't necessarily mean the last sentence of your first paragraph. It could be the last sentence of your second or your third paragraph. As long as you have transitions that smooth things out, it should be clear to us when we reach a point where your purpose is being established and you've set up all the background and the information and drawn us in, established your credibility, and there's your thesis statement that tells us what to expect in the rest of the essay. And ideally, I can read that one sentence and I can know what am I going to learn or know or be asked to do at the end of the essay. Okay? And that's really what it comes down to in writing an introduction. And this week, you're going to get the opportunity to revise your introduction to essay number 1 or number 2 and use these principles that I've suggested. You can take a look at the slides and just sort of fast forward through them without having to listen to the whole thing too. And please let me know if you have additional questions. And I look forward to seeing how your introductions expand and get more attractive and exciting.